This video was brought to you by Ground News. South Africa, once touted as a rainbow nation and the economic jewel of Africa, is in a bit of a state. Their economy is on the ropes, they're running out of energy, and South Africa's politicians seem powerless to make a dent in the poly crisis. Things have gotten so bad that the General Secretary of the ruling ANC party warned last month that the country was on the brink of becoming a failed state. So in this video, we'll take a look at South Africa's political and economic dysfunction, the escalating crisis in its state-owned energy supplier, Eskom, and whether South Africa could really end up as a failed state. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, let's start by taking a look at South Africa's economic crisis. South Africa's economy has basically been in a state of crisis since Jacob Zuma came into power in 2009. Since then, wages have flatlined, which is one of the main reasons why half of the population lives in poverty. National debt as a percentage of GDP has more than doubled, and inequality has actually gotten worse. And now it's the most unequal country in the world, according to World Bank data. One of the main reasons that South Africa is so unequal is because many South Africans, especially young black South Africans, don't have jobs. And South Africa doesn't really have a functioning welfare state to support them. Today, South Africa's unemployment rate stands at an astonishing 33%. And youth unemployment for those aged between 15 and 24 is 62%. Now, there was some hope that Cyril Ramaphosa, a business tycoon who succeeded Zuma in 2018, would be able to turn things around. But the scope and scale of this crisis has apparently overwhelmed his administration, and South Africa's economy has continued to decline. But that's not all, because South Africa's economic woes have recently been compounded by a crisis at Eskom, a state-owned company responsible for running the country's electricity grid. Eskom was founded in 1923 and has remained the largest electricity producer in South Africa ever since. Today, they produce around 95% of all electricity used in South Africa, giving it a de facto monopoly over the energy market. Not only that, but after the fall of apartheid, the company successfully electrified millions of South African homes, providing them with access to basic utilities. This success has a dark side though. In order to increase capacity and keep prices low, the company relies heavily on coal, which accounts for about 83% of its electricity generation. Unsurprisingly then, this makes the company the world's largest emitter of sulfur dioxide, and it's become a serious health issue in the country. However, this is far from the company's largest controversy. For decades, the company has been riddled by embezzlement and mismanagement, and Eskom has pretty much become synonymous with corruption in South Africa. Now, reports suggest that a lot of Eskom's woes originate with the Gupta brothers, a wealthy South African business family who, with the help of former President Jacob Zuma, essentially looted the company. After Zuma's resignation, the Gupta brothers fled to the UAE, leaving the company with $23 billion worth of debts. And it's so bad that according to one estimate, corruption cost the company the equivalent of $55 million every month, or about 5% of its revenue. And perhaps unsurprisingly as a result of this, South Africa's energy grid is now in dire need of repair. And unfortunately, good faith actors have been unable to upgrade the infrastructure in the country because it's been deliberately sabotaged by local criminal cartels, who regularly vandalize industrial sites like power plants to create expensive contracts for their affiliated repair companies. Now, after the Guptas fled, they were replaced by Andre de Ruyter, who tried to root out corruption in the company and invest in renewable energy. But he was apparently unable to make much of a dent in the crisis. Now, de Ruyter blamed the ANC government for interfering and sabotaging his anti-corruption efforts, while the government accused him of agitating to overthrow the entire state. And things got so tense that in December 2022, de Ruyter was poisoned in his own office with cyanide, and a few months later, he resigned. As a consequence, and to try and resolve this issue, Eskom have rolled out load shedding, i.e. mandatory rolling blackouts due to a lack of supply. This isn't a new thing either. They've been doing this since 2007, but the situation has become particularly acute and severe recently, with power cut off for up to 16 hours a day, and the country already seeing more blackouts this year than they did in the entirety of last year, which was already the country's worst year on record. Now, it kind of goes without saying that blackouts are terrible for both economic and humanitarian reasons. That's because blackouts make certain forms of work nearly impossible, and businesses have resorted to either setting up their own local power generators or literally sending their staff to government departments to help them run things more effectively. All in all, it's estimated that these blackouts have cost the South African economy $50 million a day and reduced GDP by something like 7 to 8% last year. Now, given that we've seen more blackouts in the last 6 months than we did in the entirety of 2022, we should expect at least double that effect on GDP this year. On top of that, a lack of energy means that water pumps and treatment centres have been unable to operate, which has caused multiple cholera outbreaks, and people have even been forced into digging their own water wells. So that brings us to the big question. Does this mean that South Africa is becoming a failed state? Well, possibly. It's clear that the state can no longer perform basic functions, and neither the economic or electricity crisis look likely to be solved anytime soon. The ANC have proved incapable of stimulating economic growth for the past decade, so there's little reason to think they'll turn things around anytime soon. And estimates suggest that South Africa needs 6,000 megawatts of extra capacity in order to solve its electricity crisis. Now, problems of this scale would take even an effective government years to sort out, and it's clearly beyond the ANC. Ultimately, whether the South African state collapses probably depends on what happens in the next election in 2024. Despite their appalling record and the fact that 80% of South Africans don't trust their government, the ANC will probably still emerge as the largest party. But if they don't win an outright majority, which seems possible, then things could go one of two ways. Either they'll form a moderate coalition with the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party who have done a pretty good job of governing South Africa's second richest province, the Western Cape, since 2019, but have struggled to appeal to South Africa's black majority. Or, alternatively, they'll form a coalition with the Economic Freedom Fighters, a Marxist black populist party who want to nationalise basically everything. Its president and founder has also said some pretty wild things, including at least implicitly suggesting that the EFF would consider killing white South Africans, and the claim that white South Africans were being, quote, trained by Jews and snipers to kill black people. So ultimately, another ANC majority or an ANC-EFF coalition might well prove fatal for the South African state. But it's hard to predict what will happen in the next election, and if South Africa will fall. And that's because economic and polling issues like this are always complex and nuanced. And as such, our goal at TLDR has always been to shed some light on these stories to help you better understand what's going on in the world around you. Unfortunately though, many news outlets use this complexity and nuance to frame a story in a certain way. Which is why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a really useful website and app which I use every day, which lets you compare related articles in one place from thousands of sources around the world and across the political spectrum, with context about each and every source of information. For instance, take this story about new lawsuits emerging from the Ugandan energy scandal. Ground News allows me to see which outlets are reporting on this most. In this case, only 16% of articles come from right-leaning outlets. It also allows me to compare headlines and stories by outlet, allowing me to get a fuller picture of what's really happening. And if I want to dive deeper into one of these reports, I can be taken to the story with just one tap, with Ground also providing reporting accuracy and bias scores for each outlet. Now, I have Ground on my phone's home screen, and I genuinely can't recommend them enough. So because of this, we've decided to offer a special 30% discount for Ground's Vantage subscription. And you can only access that discount by clicking the link down below. So check it out and help support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.